What's up, Internet? You're tuned to episode 172 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a monthly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Welcome back. It's been a minute since we've done one of these.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's weird sitting down and hearing it as a monthly video game podcast rather than a weekly video game podcast. But, you know, it means we can spend more time on these big, chunky topics.
Yeah, and we sure did spend more time on these big... I put more time doing research into this episode than I think into any other episode that we've ever done. So I hope the monthly format is exciting for you guys, because otherwise I did a lot of homework for this one for nothing. So
yeah, but it's, you know, it's satisfaction that you did a great job.
So I'm excited to get into it. This was a topic that you suggested about 2 weeks ago or whatever it was, when we were figuring out what the topic for February was going to be, which was, you know, I guess kind of a look at some recent stories, some trends that have been emerging over the last year, few months about Xbox, and, you know, trying to answer the question of, is this kind of the end of Xbox as we know it, right? Mm-hmm. Are we in the middle of what could be, you know, the last generation of proper Xbox hardware, with them existing as we've known them since they came on the scene in, you know, 2004, right? And I guess the other side of it is potentially the question of, is Xbox too forward thinking for their own good in some of these moves that they've been making? And we're going to get into it. So I want to start things off the way I imagine we will on this podcast month to month, which is, let's break down the headline that you've heard and let's talk about what it really means. So there was a big old, you know, wave of reporting a week or two ago about how Xbox hardware had reached an all-time low in 2024. That we had seen an estimated 2.7 million units of Xbox hardware sold in the US, and then another 290,000 units roughly sold in Europe. And that brings them to a total of just under 3 million units sold for the entire year. So that is a 10% drop year over year in units sold, which is leading to a 42% drop in Xbox hardware revenue for the quarter that ended in June 2024.
Even still, like a 10% drop's not even that much. I mean, we went from 3.6 million down to 3 million units. Even still, like that, it sounds low, but it was already low. Compare that to the competition. You know, PlayStation 5 sold 9.5 million units between October and December.
Yeah, so in 3 months, they sold more than 3 times the number of boxes that Xbox sold for the entire year, just in the holiday period. And then
I guess there is like the question as to, is Xbox selling in Japan? Like, is that factored into the 3 million units as well? Because it says Europe, but I don't know if
if you recall, they made a big push at the beginning of this generation to get consoles into Japan, and I the fact that we don't have numbers makes me think that maybe that was just not very successful. I haven't heard them talk about Japan again in quite some time.
Yeah, because they're often like at the Tokyo Game Show. They've got a presentation around that. Japan obviously was a big thing for them, but they missed out on huge exclusives. You know, why are you going to pick up an Xbox when you can't play the latest Final Fantasy there? You're just not.
Right. Or to the point that Phil's been making, right, where if like all your games are in the PlayStation ecosystem, are you really going to pick up an Xbox? You know? You might get a Game Pass subscription,
like and that's I think that was the big question I had with when I proposed this topic. It's like, what is the reason for buying one of these anymore? You know, and clearly people are looking at it and going, well, there isn't one. Only 3 million people bought one in 2024, and a large part of that has got to be due to the fact that, well, all your favorite Xbox games are coming to PlayStation anyway.
Yeah, like if you were someone that bought it for exclusives or whatever, right? Like, you know, it seems like now you probably won't have to worry about that, right? Like whatever game you'd want to play on Xbox will probably come to PlayStation eventually, or you could play it on PC, right? Is the other side of that. Just another like point of comparison to bring up. I thought it was interesting to note, like you brought up PlayStation sales, right? For Nintendo in the fiscal, they had a fiscal report for the 9-month period that ended in December 31st. During that time, hardware sales were down by a little over 30%, and they still sold 9.54 million units, meaning that like an 8-year-old console from Nintendo is still selling more than 3 times what Xbox sold in a year in 9 months. So yeah, from a hardware perspective, it's dire, right? Like the Xbox Series consoles are not selling well. They're in a real distant third place when it comes to selling hardware, right?
Which to be fair, like they've been looking at pinning their hopes on this like monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue from Game Pass. The shift has very much been in the last year to, well, we're just going to be a multi-platform publisher. We're going to be, the new Sega, or we're going to take on EA. We're going to be the biggest people. And I think that strategy makes sense when you see these numbers, because why are you going to put the games that you bought, Call of Duty, or even like, I'm surprised that Starfield is still an Xbox exclusive, when you can only sell it really to a handful of people. I mean, they've probably sold like less than 20 million Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S consoles looking at these numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I didn't find a number for total because they haven't, they haven't
reported it in years.
And also I didn't really think it was like that relevant to the context of the conversation, because like we know that they're in third place, right? Like Phil says they're in third place all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably correct, right? It's probably sub 20. I wouldn't be surprised if it's even a little less than that. Just because, yeah, I mean, it's never, it had like decent sales out the gate, and it's been kind of a slow decline since then,
So you've got a market of only 20 million people. If the attachment rate is, like 20% for a game, I mean, you're selling like 4 million, 5 million copies, and that's it. And that's the most you could really hope. Bear in mind that most people are playing these games on Game Pass anyway, rather than buying them, because if you've got an Xbox, you might as well just sub to Game Pass and play the games for.
So let's talk about software, because that's another not so great trend for Xbox in terms of software sales, and I think that that's for exactly the reason you identified, right? Like, not only are there not that many Xboxes in the wild compared to the competition, right? They're being outsold, by 3 to 5 times, depending on what, frame of time you're looking at. So this, report about hardware, right, comes just a few months after multiple reports have been trickling out from Europe and then the US that there are some retailers are choosing to no longer carry physical Xbox games due to low sales, or that they're reducing the amount of shelf space that is given to Xbox titles if they haven't totally removed them from the shelves. And there was a couple of reports about that going on in European countries in the middle of last year, and then now as recently as November, there was reports about like Target specifically starting to reduce how much space they were giving, and some people even saying that their local Target just no longer carried Xbox titles at all. So I think whether or not you'll still see an Xbox title in your store near you is probably based on where you live. Like where I live, there are like my local Target still has an Xbox section, but like I live in a dense, area. So like there's probably still some sales happening there. Whereas like, if you're, in a rural area or something like that, and there just are less consumers around, then yeah, those margins are probably not so great. Now, like I said, we don't have any specific numbers for Xbox software sales at this point. But I think, obviously, given the fact that retailers are choosing to not carry them, it speaks to the fact that they're not in a healthy place, right? Regardless of if we have a specific number that we can use as a point of comparison. Now, just to keep things consistent, I got numbers from PlayStation and Nintendo just to give a point of comparison when it comes to hardware and software. So for PlayStation, in the third fiscal quarter of 2024, they sold approximately 95.9 million games for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, which was up from 77.7 million units the previous quarter.
Annoying that they bundle them together. Very annoying. And this is, just to clarify, this is all games or just PlayStation Studios games?
All games.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe there was... I think I have the number somewhere of what percentage of that was first party titles, but it's not that much. It's like less than a quarter of those sales were first party. It's like somewhere like 10% or something like that, I think. So then for Nintendo, unit sales decreased by again around, it's 27%. Pretty much everything was around 30% decline from them this year. And that equated to 70.28 million software units. So, quite a bit of software sold even on a down year.
But with Nintendo's, my presumption is that's just first-party titles. Looking at the investor relations slides, it seems that is 70.28 million units sold by Nintendo. So third-party stuff published by others would probably be different.
I'm not sure. That, to me, I didn't interpret it as being Nintendo only software looking at this. Like the way that it doesn't show that it's been broken down that way. So
no, you're right, because it says number of million seller titles, 9 titles, 6 Nintendo titles and 3 titles.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's totality. Yeah. So
man, some of those games have really long shelf life as well. Like Luigi's Mansion 2, which is obviously the remaster, but Mario Kart selling another 2.3 million units.
It's just crazy. It's like that game is like 11 years old. It's so crazy. So I think the wrinkle I'd like to bring up here in Xbox's favor when it comes to sales, right? Because we don't know about units being sold on Xbox, right? But we do know that, to the point you made earlier, this was the first year that we saw Xbox start to go multi-platform as a publisher, and they saw some really big success there, right? Mostly attributed to the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, but we'll talk about that a little bit as we go.
Massively inflated by the acquisition of Activision Blizzard.
Yeah. So Black Ops 6, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 was the top-selling game on Xbox and PlayStation this past quarter, and it saw more players in its launch history than any other paid release in franchise history. So obviously, really, really successful launch for Black Ops. Was a huge boon for Xbox this year. So they were the top video game publisher in December of 2024, generating $465 million, most of which, again, is from the success of Call of Duty. 64% of those sales were on PlayStation 2. On PlayStation as well. So I think that's something that's worth considering in this conversation as well, is that like Xbox's success on PlayStation is also success for PlayStation. They're taking 30% of all that revenue. So
actually, I think they get less than 30% because it was in one of those leaked. Well, it was in one of those things that came out during the FTC thing.
They agreed to a different.
Bobby Kotick had agreed to. I think it was like 15 or 20%.
Okay, and that's good for them.
Yeah.
So the last bit about sales I want to just pull in here is a report that I think is just worth bringing in just for context, and it's something that I anticipate people in the comments may be wondering about, and I'd love to just give you the context. So there's a report that is due out from a investment strategy firm that's called the State of Video Gaming in 2025, which is bringing a bunch of data from research firms like IDG and Newzoo and Circana. and trying to like summarize trends that are going on worldwide in the games industry. And, overall, we've seen, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that this is from another report, that there's been a 15% decrease in spending on video games overall. People are spending less on games than they have over the last couple of years. The problem with a lot of this data is that it really ignores the context of
and people are spending less on everything, right?
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that, like, and this is the thing that's like a problem these last couple of years, right? As we're comparing where the video game industry is right now versus where it was 5 years ago, right? Is that in 2020 we saw an artificial bump, right? Mm-hmm. Is that because of the pandemic, because people were stuck at home, they had less things to do, they had less options for entertainment. Spending on video games increased a lot, and to a point that was, I think, very obviously temporary. It was an artificial, ballooning. And the problem with, and not to jump on my soapbox, but the problem with capitalism and publicly traded companies is that number has to keep going up. Number must go up. If it goes down, if it's the same, that's a failure. It's plateaued. The market is stagnant. Those things aren't true, though, right? Like, you need to understand the context of the spending.
I don't necessarily think it's a problem with capitalism. I think it's a problem with Wall Street, and they just look at the numbers and they take a look at it at face value, and they don't go, well, is there other value in the business? Like the IP, the humans involved, like the knowledge that's in this company. Like, we don't just necessarily have to look at, they've added 10,000 more users or whatever. But.
Yeah, and the thing that I wanted to call out, right, is like in this report they talked about how like the kind of like lone bright spot in terms of like continued growth has been the PC market, right? The PC market has been consistently growing. There's more and more users on PC. People are spending more money on PC games. Younger groups of like younger demographics, a higher percentage of them play on PC. So like PC is doing well right now. It's also worth considering, right, that like when you're comparing these numbers, because one of the things that they say is that in 2024, consumers spent almost $50 billion more dollars on PC and console games than they did in 2011. So it speaks to the massive growth that games have had in that period, and the idea that like, oh, it's in decline, it's stagnated, it's this, it's that. It's just like, I mean, maybe, but it's after a historic high point that was created by a bunch of like hopefully irrepeatable.
What, in 2011 though? Things. Like, is 2011 is that not repeatable?
That's just the number that they're comparing. I don't know why they chose 2011. But
it's saying it's stagnated since 2021, which, to be fair, it may have. Like, looking at the numbers, like obviously Xbox is not selling very well.
No.
I don't really see that there's been that many huge blockbuster years, other than maybe like the year before last, 2023. Like there hasn't really been that 1 year where we can all point to and go, holy shit, this is going to go down as one of the best years in gaming.
Since when? Wait, I don't understand what you're saying.
Since like 2021. Like, when can you think of a year?
I mean, last year I think was one of those years, right?
For all consoles though, like that's what I think you need to look at. It has to be a year where it's like, PlayStation's firing on all cylinders and Nintendo's firing on all cylinders.
I don't think that happens anymore because they're all on such different cycles, right? Because I think if you're comparing this year to 2021, think about that. We're at the end of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle.
And the 20 and 2021.
We're at the beginning of two consoles' life cycles.
Exactly,
in 2021.
Which is strange. Like, it's strange to look at it as go, right, the beginning of a generation, people are going to be buying new consoles. And I presume that's fiscal year 2021. So it would have started in 2020 when those new consoles had launched. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you had a pandemic where everyone's staying at home. And we had probably one of the biggest games of all time with Animal Crossing New Horizons launching. It's just like, well, yeah, it's very hard to match that.
The sequel to Breath of the Wild came out last, there's all these things that were like, well, yeah, no shit, this year where there's none of those things, and we're waiting for new hardware, and we're in the middle of a console's life cycle. And we talked about the PS4 Pro, right? Was, I think, something that people didn't need. It didn't ignite the market in the same way that the PS4 Pro did, because that felt like it was necessary at the time. This doesn't, and I think that like
VR2
Sure.
fell flat on its face. Why do you think though that PC gaming's grown 20% though in comparison? Do you think it's because in 2021 no one really cared about it and it's grown just because of like competition from Epic and the Steam Deck, and we've got better hardware and better chips now that's more affordable, and the entry point is better? Like, what do you think it is?
I think it's a multitude of factors. I think that like the fact that there is I mean, and you think about this, right? In 2011, PC gaming was not what it is now. Right? Like PC, like concurrence on Steam, like they used to be so much lower. Like we talked about this when like we were comparing sales of like Dragon Age the Veilguard to Inquisition, and how Veilguard was a failure even though it sold better at launch than Inquisition did, but that's because nobody was playing games on, not nobody, way less people were playing games on PC in 2011 than they are now. And
but this number's compared against 2021.
Oh, no.
Grown
I'm just saying that like PC has been on a big rise the last decade, right? Like generally, to your point, this 20% increase is just from 4 years ago. And I think it's a multitude of things. I think you could, throw in the handheld PC market into that conversation, the Steam Deck and those other form factors getting some new people into it, expanding into markets like, Korea and Japan and places where like PC gaming has not been as prevalent. Like, I'm sure that that's part of it.
I think it also just made people think about PC gaming again. Like most people our age had played a game on a PC, shifted over to a console, and then just either stuck with the console or stuck with the PC. They were kind of one or the other. I feel like that's changed now, and people kind of just play everywhere.
And the other thing I think is that there's been the rise in like, and not that this is unique to the last 4 years, but like there are now like 2 generations of younger gamers that have grown up watching streamers and like personalities, and most of those people,
that makes me feel so old.
Yeah, it is, because you are. And most of those people, right, like probably play on PC, and they have like a really fancy high quality rig, and they're playing like new cutting edge games that are on PC, right? And it's like if you're somebody that like is in the demographic to be playing like Roblox or something like that or whatever. Like those games are on PC, so that's where you're playing,
I think most people actually play Roblox on mobile. If you look at the people playing, but they're building the games on PC. Like that's where the tools to make
and
them
the players are on mobile.
It's kind of like a gateway. You're just like, oh, I like Roblox. I want to learn to play. I'm playing it on my iPad. And then you're just like, well, I could be making these games. I've got a cool idea for it. And you transition over to the PC, and that's kind of where you go. And I feel like the modding scene has very much been prevalent on PC. They've tried and dabbled with it on consoles with like, Skyrim had it in the special edition.
Fallout 4's got it.
Fallout 4, but it's like modding light. It's
just not the same level of control, and there's like copyright concerns and stuff that you don't have on PC, and So I think it's all of those things. Like I think it's the fact that like PC has a lot of distinct advantages over console, and I think that if you don't grow up playing a certain way and you get exposed to it, it's like you're in, and then those are just things that you know how to deal with, and you don't even think about it. So yeah, I think I bring that up to say that I think that this the kind of doom and gloom about stagnation and stuff like that is very motivated, to your point, by like Wall Street types, and the idea that like games are in decline or whatever. They're in decline to people that want to use them as a cash cow to make a bunch of money and cash out. That might be true, but I don't think that speaks to like a broader like.
What would the motivation be there though to say that they're in decline? Because a lot of people have a lot of money wrapped up in 2 stocks, and that is Nvidia, and that's like booming, and a large part of that is due to the AI frenzy and everyone fucking buying their chips to train their large language models. However, they're the number 1 player in video games. They only seek to gain more value if people continue to buy games and game. Number 2, Microsoft. is $1 trillion company. It fluctuates between the first and the second most valuable company in the world. They're intrinsically linked to video games too. And granted, you look at their numbers and their figures, and like they hide video gaming in with like the fucking Microsoft Surface.
It was
because
so hard to get actual numbers about how much money Xbox makes. I had to do so much digging and like pulling data. We'll get into it, but it was a mess because they don't want to talk about it.
But why would you want to suppress like and paint this narrative the video game stagnant? Because it's clearly not, and we can look at the numbers and we can see that there's huge amounts of growth and more people playing constantly. And I know this is just one report and one analyst's opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that question is because analysts make money by analyzing things and trying to prognosticate trends, right? And that doesn't mean that they're right, you know? And like, I'm not saying this with like disrespect to the Matt Piscatellas and those folks of the world, but they get it wrong. They are looking at market trends and trying to, like guess what's going to happen. And like that.
Well, yeah, we had that like years ago. It was like, oh, this is the last console generation. We're not going to have any more mobiles where everyone's going to play games.
Yeah, I remember watching, pre-PlayStation 4 press coverage, right? And this was industry analysts, this was commentators, journalists that were all like, this will probably be the last generation of consoles. We're going to move towards set-top boxes. We're going to move towards, you have one device that you access, like, again, talking about basically a Game Pass style future of like what, you'll have a PlayStation app on the one box that we all own or whatever, right?
I'm still kind of amazed that that's not where we're going to end up. Like, I would be astounded if that's not where we end up with an Xbox app on PlayStation at this point.
That's probably true, that part, maybe. But I think
Nintendo, I think you can make as an outlier. I don't think they're gonna fall in line.
I don't think anyone's gonna. I don't think PlayStation or Nintendo abandon hardware until it's no longer profitable to sell it. That's the reality. And again, based on what we've been talking about, I don't know. There is data that shows, right, that like younger players spend more time on PC or mobile, right, and they're not, but it's like so much of that is like trying to guess how Gen Alpha is gonna behave as consumers when they're not even like. It's just it's a lot of prognosticating based on data that has not netted out yet, and I think that there are a lot of things that like the folks that sell things ignore when they talk about the future of this technology, right? Like the fact that like internet infrastructure is still, behind in a lot of places, and not just in like, minor markets or something like that. It's not like, some country that doesn't buy a bunch of video games and they don't have good internet infrastructure. No, it's like, there are people that live in New York City that have bad internet, right?
But I don't think that has had a negative impact on software sales. You can look and you can see the shift to digital. And the fact that
that's my point though, is you need a box for that though. You still need a console, right? And I don't think we will always need them. The question is though, is there going to come a point where the alternative to having, and it doesn't even have to be a console, a box though, like
it's just got to be good enough. I don't even think it's a box. It's your TV. It's your smart TV,
right.
And there's already the Xbox app on Samsung TVs.
Yeah, but that requires that relies on the cloud.
Yeah, it does. But I think that's probably the future, because when was the last time that you downloaded a movie?
Movies are not the same thing.
No, I know they're not the same thing, but the technology for movies has advanced leaps and bounds. I remember watching QuickTime movie trailers when I was a kid, and like I had to wait for it to buffer the whole thing before I could click play.
Yeah,
and now I can stream a 4K HDR movie to my house.
I think it's a false equivalency though when we bring that up, and I'm not sitting here saying I really want to be clear. I'm not trying to be an old person who's like, this is the way things are. And I know that you're right, that it's happened in every other industry, right? It happened with music first, and I don't think it's any surprise that it's because music files are the smallest files. Happened with film, right? All the,
books,
everything, right? You can go subscription. Video games are not the same as any of these other mediums because they are not they're not static in the same way, right? Whereas like if I'm say I am watching a 4K movie, right? As you said, I'm streaming a 4K movie to my television, right? And my internet dips, and maybe for a scene or two, the quality dips, and it bumps down to 720 or 1080, and it looks a little shitty for a second, and then it corrects itself, and you swallow it and you move on, right? And most people don't give a shit, right? Like, that's fine.
That's the real point there. I think most people won't give a shit about streaming FIFA or Call of Duty. I just don't. And I think when it gets to the point where it's good enough and I can deal with, and it's good enough and I'm not losing matches because it dips, they figure out a solution for that.
That's far away though, dude. Like, we're not there.
I don't think it is.
I think it is. I think it is. I totally do.
I think it's a few years at most.
Before that is a solution for everybody. You think that?
Before, when it's this is good enough for
what is good enough
of the market?
Because you just
good enough for me and you is not that. Good enough for me and you is it looks fucking great. We're enthusiasts. It's the people that only buy 2 games a year.
Yeah, okay, but hold on. But pump the brakes, right? Because we're sitting here having this conversation. We just talked about how PC gaming is on the rise, right? So doesn't that mean that more people that play video games, that really spend money on video games, care about that?
They do, however, but we also just had the conversation that 65% of Xbox's game sales were on PlayStation. The other 35% was PC and Xbox. So 65% is still playing on console. That is a huge chunk of the market.
Definitely.
I think if the sell is you no longer need to buy a console.
You can just play on your TV.
You can save yourself $500. Just buy a controller and connect it to your TV, and for $12.99, $14.99, whatever it is, you can play FIFA.
I have so many problems with that, and I want to poke holes in it, and I would like you to allow me to poke the holes, and then you can fill them up. Because if you jump in, I'm going to lose my train of thought. But so there's multiple problems with that don't exist with film. Right? Or let's use film because it's the most popular example. Movies and television have basically been ruined by streaming, right? Like that's replaced everything. That's the only way that anyone gets anything. That's how it is now. Could that happen in video games? Absolutely. I don't think it will. Here's why. First of all, video games lengthwise dwarf every other one of those mediums, right? A short video game is like 5 times the length of the average movie, right? So there's that. I think
or twice the length of a Marvel movie, yeah. Like those Avengers movies.
They're like 3 hours.
3 hours long.
So, but it's still like 3 times that length even, right? So it's
fair, yeah.
Point being, right? The reason that those models, I believe, work is because you get a good value proposition, right? Where I pay $12 a month, whatever the fuck it is now, right? For Netflix, and I could spend that same amount of money buying 1 movie. Or I could watch 10 movies or 15 movies or whatever. And even if I don't actually do it, the mentality is so it's like, well, yeah, I'm paying for access, right? I don't think that works with video games, because if you're somebody who is an enthusiast, right, and you actually play games to completion, right, and you want to play multiple video games and whatever, that's the only way that you really get the maximum value out of Game Pass is either if you're playing lots of short games, right, that you would have I would have spent $15 on this indie game. I would have spent another 20 on this one. I would have spent another 10 on this one. And if you're actually playing them and rolling credits on them and like getting the value that you would have gotten out of them, or you're just saving yourself the money for spending and trying them, like that's where you get the value. But if we're talking about that average gamer that plays FIFA, why would I spend $15 a month on a service, right, for the one game I want to play? Right? Like, you're spending twice as much money a year to play FIFA than you would have for just buying the copy of the game.
You bought the copy of the game, but you also spent $500 on the console. So that you're down $570 out of the gate.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas I'm down for the cost of the year, $120, and I can play FIFA all day long. And I also have access to all these other ones. And that's all I've had to get.
Yeah, and there are people for whom that will be attractive.
And we can already see there are alternative services like Nvidia's GeForce Now, where you play the games you own, you buy them,
Right.
and you stream the games you own, and we've seen Xbox moving into that as well.
And I think that is an interesting question. Is like, can you build a digital library and then just access it anywhere? I think that would be very attractive. So okay, that's point number one, and I think you've argued against it well enough, right? I don't know that either of us are correct. I think it depends on the use case of the person and what.
It does depend on the person.
Right?
I think enthusiasts are always going to be more likely to go for a box.
So now let's talk about the casual user, right? How many of the casual users are the person that plays like 1 or 2 games a year, and how many of those games are multiplayer games, online multiplayer games like Call of Duty or FIFA or Fortnite or whatever, right? So if they're free to play, right, like that revenue stream is like, I mean, there's an argument to be made that it's like you'll come up with some kind of profit sharing or whatever, who's to say, but it's like if we're moving away from box, right, it wouldn't be that I have an Xbox app, right, and I'm playing Fortnite through that. You'd be playing Fortnite on your television through the Epic Game Store app,
yes,
or this
Epic
or
could
that.
do that.
So okay,
Epic's a huge company.
They
the same way that Valve could do that.
They absolutely could, right?
But
again,
who owns the data centers and the hardware? It's Microsoft,
right? And that's a benefit for them, of course. If this comes to pass, because then they're just making money on the infrastructure, which is, and granted, they made a good amount of money on cloud services this year. Like that's one of Microsoft's biggest, drivers of revenue. And like, PlayStation uses their cloud technology, right? So it's like, absolutely, when it comes to that side of services, like nobody's beating Xbox or Microsoft, right? But that Xbox doesn't need to exist for that to be the case, right?
No.
Xbox could get wound down, sold off for parts, and they could just continue selling that software to people. So that doesn't really say anything for Xbox as much as it does for Microsoft. But anyway, the point I was driving to is that if you are one of those people and you play those games, right, which we know that's where a majority of revenue comes from. Not only are like the PlayStations of the world, that's all revenue that they're just losing out on, right? So like that's, I think, to your point, like could be a real damaging factor for consoles.
I mean, that was one of the reasons why they were very keen for the Activision deal not to go through. They were very worried that they were going to lose Call of Duty, which is their most profitable game on their platform.
Yeah, well, some years anyway, right? It certainly was this past year, right? It was at least for the month it came out. So the problem with that though is the fact that so many of those games are online multiplayer games. So it's like the idea that like again, right? Like you think in the next 10 years we're gonna have internet infrastructure everywhere that people are playing these games that you can stream them in real time from the cloud and not have any problems with latency that are losing you to lose matches or, like create points of frustration that make the game less enjoyable to play.
I'm not saying everywhere, but I'm saying in Xbox's primary markets, number one is the United States and Canada. That is their primary market, and we can see that from their sales figures. I think there in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be absolutely a market where you can stream video games. And I think with technology similar to what Stadia had, which we've seen, it was part of the leak that they accidentally uploaded their screenshots to the FTC, the controller that directly connects to your Wi-Fi, so that there's even less latency. It's not having to go through the Bluetooth to the TV and then the TV's connection to the Wi-Fi and then the Wi-Fi to the server. It is straight to the Wi-Fi to the server, and that's what's sending the control signals to. It reduces the latency. It reduces that issue. I do think for most people, that's going to be good enough and they'll be okay with it. It was good enough for me at Christmas when I was playing Indiana Jones. For multiplayer, it's different. And right now, I think it probably is different for multiplayer.
I think for single player, that's fine. But most people are playing multiplayer. That's where the most money's made, all that, right? So, and not to push back too hard, but I think the devil's advocate point I'll make there to put a pin on this so we can move on to the next section is, you said the same thing about the spread of 5G internet about 5 years ago, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah, honestly, it astounds me that the
So
spread of 5G internet has taken so long. I mean, part of that
that's like my
probably is
whole
due to
point with
COVID.
this stuff is that I think some of these are great ideas, but it's like there are all of these realities that it's like you're telling me we're going to live in a world where internet is orders of magnitude better than it is right now, and that people are willing to spend more money
It's
on
either
something
the
that is a
internet-
luxury than they are while spending is in a decline.
See,
I just
part
don't
of
see
me
that.
is like, is it the internet that's going to be orders of magnitude better, or is it the technology that's orders of magnitude better? And I kind of feel it's the latter. I feel like we've made leaps and bounds, even in terms of video compression in the last 3 to 5 years. AV1 is a huge step up. NVIDIA is constantly improving. Their reflex technology, for example, is able to predict what you're going to do in a video game very, very well with machine learning.
That is going to be a big differentiator, because that's the other point that sticks to the original point I was making about like the size of video games is also that they're not static, right? Like it's like the next scene in a film is always the next scene in a film. Whereas like particularly in a multiplayer game, that's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, not impossible. We're a very long way from a point where AI will be able to accurately predict the number of variables that you have in a game like, say, Fortnite, where there are 99 players dropping onto, it's like, that's so, like...
However, they can already do frame generation in Fortnite and in multiplayer games. So it's already predicting and generating a frame between this frame and what it thinks the next frame is going to look like based on what it's seeing on the screen at 120 frames per second or more.
Yeah. And to your point, it doesn't always happen. Look at VR, right? VR is, I think, barely better than it was when the previous generation launched, like almost 10 years ago now. But generally speaking, as technology becomes readily available, the rate at which it improves increases. But again, I mean, we've seen some serious stagnation when it comes to advancement of like internet infrastructure and some of these other things that have been bottlenecks for some of this technology, where it's like, yeah, if you live in California and you got fiber optic internet, then like, yeah, you can do this stuff. But again, right, like when I was doing my other podcast, right, like I had co-hosts that lived in Manhattan that had shit internet. And that's like one of the biggest cities in the world, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
mad to me.
When I like, the apartment I lived in before I moved to Philly, right? Like I couldn't get high-speed internet that was capable of playing like games online reliably, let alone streaming the game, And granted, that was a couple of years ago, but like we have not seen the leaps and bounds that people promised with the advancement of stuff like 5G and the spread of fiber optic internet. It just hasn't happened. And there's 10 years from now, we might all have fiber optic internet and it might not matter. But there's also the question of like, is the technology you're talking about, like the AI stuff that can, what's the word I'm looking for? Like optimize games better to have them run at a smaller size and lower frame rate and all those things, and then upscale with AI. Like those things could all be things that close that gap. But again, I don't know. It's like, I think there's also the reality of like, how are you going to feel when you're the only way that you can play video games anytime there's an internet outage, then you can't play?
See, that's the thing. I feel like for most people, they just be like, oh, well, I'm playing a multiplayer game anyway, so who cares?
Yeah.
I can't play with my friends. The internet's out. However,
and to your point, the enthusiast crowd,
the enthusiasts will buy it in the same way that if I'm an audiophile, I'm buying myself a high-end hi-fi system with a turntable so I can listen to vinyl.
Yeah. Point taken, I think, and we can table this part so we can move on, but I think my thought is that the type of person that you're describing exists, but I wonder if that's not new users and lapsed users. And like I wonder how much of it is people who are willing to abandon their PlayStation, for example, for an app versus people that like weren't buying consoles anyway, but are like, oh, like I can just download it. Yeah, I'll, whatever. Right. Like,
yeah, but I mean, it does remain to be seen. Does Gen Alpha give a shit about buying a console? If they're playing on PC and they're playing on mobile, they might not.
They might not. But it's also worth pointing out that there's a whole new generation. There's a whole generation of people that are about to grow up at the exact same time as the brand new Nintendo console, while they're also making theme parks and movies and all these other things that ingratiate children. So again, assuming that they won't is,
Oh man, I watched the Mario movie again the other night. It came to Netflix in the UK. That's a great film. That's a great film. Nintendo did a good job of that.
You like it a lot more than you did when we reviewed it.
I had a really good time just watching it because I watched it and I went in knowing what I was expecting this time.
It's a fun movie.
And I saw even more Easter eggs and I was like, this is goofy. This is great.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's a good movie. It's not, it's not
It's
high
nothing
art.
to write home about. It's a 7 out of 10, middle of the line.
Yeah.
Great.
I think I agree with you. It's like a 7 out of 10 movie, but like because I like Mario, I'm like, it hits like an 8 though.
Yeah.
It's not a great film, but as like if you're a child, perfectly serviceable, enjoyable time, and if you're an adult with an attachment to Mario, I think there's plenty for you to get into. So anyway, we'll save that for Nintendo noise. Let's talk about services now, because we've talked about hardware, we've talked about software. We have not talked about the area where Xbox has planted their flag, which is services, right? And that, is an area where, like, obviously, like, they're doing well, right? Like, Xbox Game Pass has continued to thrive. It's set new records. It's made more money. There are a lot of caveats and some context to that I think. Not that it casts a negative light on Game Pass, but that to me speaks to the fact that the success that they have is not necessarily sustainable in the same way. And that's where I have concerns about their health. And I say that as somebody that I like my Xbox. I play my Xbox more than my PlayStation. I'm a Game Pass subscriber. Like, I like Xbox. I'm not trying to talk shit about Xbox. But let's talk about Game Pass, right? So we don't have an up-to-date number of the monthly active users for Game Pass, but last month, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said that Game Pass had set a record for quarterly revenue and that the PC portion of the subscription had seen growth of 30% in subscribers. So it's, we saw growth this year. And if we want to do like a little bad napkin math, because Xbox doesn't love to give us hard numbers, a year prior, Microsoft celebrated that they had hit 34 million, quote, fully paid Xbox Game Pass subscribers. So it's unclear, like, we saw increase in revenue, 30% of the growth in subscribers was on PC. It's unclear if that means that, like, they have retained the number they had and grown, or if it's just become more profitable, because, like, it also costs a little bit more than it used to. Like, there are factors that might shore that up, but I think if you just take those numbers at face value, and we want to be generous, you're talking about a 30% increase would be an additional 10,200,000 users. So that would put them at, like, roughly 44 million users, which I doubt it's exactly that high, but it's probably right around there, right? Like,
even if you take 10 million off that is more than I thought. A lot more than I thought. When we were speaking about the Xbox numbers, and it was like, oh, they've probably sold less than 20 million Series X's. Mm-hmm. The fact that they almost double that in terms of number of Game Pass subscribers is huge. Is huge. And there's a few more details here that are worth sharing. During that same call, Nadella also mentioned that Xbox cloud gaming had been seeing steady growth, and there had been 140 million hours streamed that quarter, which was the highest amount of hours of game streamed. So I think that speaks to your point that, like, more and more people are taking advantage of it. Granted, it is also free right now, so that's I guess another. It's not free. It's part of Game Pass.
It's
Ultimate.
Bundled with Game Pass, right?
But you have to pay for the Ultimate tier. Most people,
that's true.
If you're just paying for console or PC Game Pass, you're not getting it. You have to pay even more to get that, which unlocks PC Game Pass as well. You kind of get it all in one. I do wish it was their pricing was a little bit clearer. Like, I don't think you should gatekeep that behind Ultimate. And I'd love to also have just a streaming only tier, where I don't, if I don't own a console and I don't own a PC and I just want to stream it to my Steam Deck so I can play Indiana Jones or whatever on there.
So, and another, I think, angle that's, like, worth mentioning, I know you called bullshit on this when we discussed it offline,
No,
so
big time.
you can do that. But Nadella was also talking about like the users they have across their various channels now that like they own Activision Blizzard, right? And so it's like they have, you know, gamers on PC that are playing on Battle.net. They have gamers on mobile, like playing Candy Crush and all that stuff, that they now have over 500 million monthly active users across platforms and devices. That obviously...
Well, do you want to hazard a guess, Peter, how many monthly active users Candy Crush has?
Probably was it half?
It's 200 million.
Right.
So 200 million of that is just they bought Candy Crush and they added those numbers to their books. It's actually ridiculous, the fact that they used that number. They just bought Activision Blizzard and added those numbers to it. It's really not any growth at all. It's just from an acquisition.
Which is, you know, a bit of a trend. that we'll talk about as we get into the actual revenue and how much of that is potentially artificial, right? Or that it looks better on paper than it is in context, I guess is maybe the better way to put that.
It's great for an investor call.
Yeah,
you know? It
exactly.
looks great on paper. And that's where you kind of got to look at the context of these numbers are for Wall
Investors.
Street.
Right. So then we'll do our comparison here for users for PlayStation and Nintendo, just to give you an idea, because I mean, yeah, it's no competition, right? When it comes to services, Xbox crushing the other two, right? Sony stopped reporting PlayStation Plus subscriber numbers after the price hike that happened back in...
Well, that's not a good look then, is it?
2023, I think is right.
Yeah. When I know most people I knew that had PlayStation Plus canceled it.
Right. So March 2023 was the last time that we got a hard number from them, and they said that they had 47.4 million subscribers. So, you know, like right in line with Game Pass.
My guess would be it's probably about the same, because they've added a lot more consoles on. People will have lapsed on their subscriptions and canceling. It's probably balanced out on the whole.
So basically what they reported was that there was a big decline in users, like the number of users dropped off, but it actually became more profitable once they increased the price. So this is from their most recent earnings report, like that ended in December, and it's like talking about the holiday period and everything. Network services revenues rose by 29% year over year to $1.1 billion, with PlayStation Plus sales increasing 20%, quote, mainly due to the higher tiers of service and the impact of price revisions. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, they may have lost the number of subscribers, but the subscribers that they retained are spending more money. So it ended up...
Same deal with Netflix. And
right.
How when they did we're going to cut people off if they share passwords, and it worked.
And this is kind of just mostly a for what it's worth thing. But during that same financial report, they talked about their monthly active users. These are not PlayStation Plus subscribers. This is just monthly active PlayStation users. And they hit a new peak of 129 million. So I think that's, you know... in the context of what you said, where it's like that 500 number feels like a little bit, you know, inflated.
It's massively inflated.
Right?
You're taking PC and PlayStation, because don't forget they've started selling games on PlayStation. They can bring those users now on board to say, and presumably they were already doing that anyway with every Minecraft user that was already on PlayStation. They were just saying,
or whatever.
That's one of ours.
Right.
You
right.
know?
So it's like, I think it's worth pointing out that, like, yes, like Microsoft does have more monthly active users, but they're not as valuable to Microsoft as PlayStation's active users. They spend more money. They behave in ways that make PlayStation more money month to month, which is why... I
wonder how much Candy Crush is making them month to month, though.
I mean, a shitload.
Why is Candy Crush so popular?
Isn't
it just Bejeweled, but with sweets?
People like Match 4 games. It's simple.
It's Bejeweled with sweets. Like, how did that become so huge?
They're just... It's fun. People like puzzle games, you know? It's that simple.
I love that style.
Think about how much money Balatro made. Same thing. It's like simple, Tetris, right? It's like it just works. It scratches your brain. You're like, this is fun.
Yeah,
it's
totally,
satisfying.
But why that one?
And if you're bad at it, you can still play. You know, like there's a higher level of play if you learn how to like, you know, do more advanced matching.
Like
but if you don't, you can just do it, and it's like, you know, it makes sense to me that those kind of games make money for sure.
A lot of money.
So then, talking about Nintendo, this is for NSO. They said that they have 34 million users paying for NSO as of September 30th.
Tell you what, if they didn't have cloud saves locked behind that, they wouldn't.
Maybe. They did say, though, that although they saw a year-over-year decrease in membership due to fewer new releases in the past year, many people continue to enjoy Nintendo Switch Online. Quote, additionally, the number of people opting for the higher tier Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack has been steadily increasing since the service began in 2021.
Why? They've added nothing new to it.
I think it's just more people wanting to play what is there, probably, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. Like if they're still selling, 10 million consoles a year, you're buying the 2.3 million new copies of Mario Kart sold. You might as well buy the expansion pass and play that. So yeah,
exactly,
makes sense.
Right? Or again, like say that you were somebody who like when it got announced, you were like, there's not enough games on there. That's not worth it. But now you're like, well, there's like 15. I'd play like 5 of these N64 games. Let me do it. You know,
it's not even the N64 stuff. It's more like, where was the expansions that they promised? Why is the Splatoon 3 one not on there? Why is the Xenoblade one not on there?
Why is there no rhyme or reason to that? I think the bigger, like, why isn't that communicated more clearly? But either way, point is, lot of monthly active users for underwhelming service. So like the other guys, right? Like they're not making as much money with services, but like they both have a healthy service that makes them quite a bit of money.
Do you think this is enough for them to just be like, you know what, we're pulling the plug on the box. We're going to go down the route of it's just services, because they're hardly selling any boxes anyway.
You mean for Xbox?
For Xbox. They've got the new ad campaign of this is an Xbox, and it's, a laptop, it's a handheld console, it's a fridge, it's like...
Let me pull a question in from the question block. Trendy Brendy wrote in just like you can and said, is the console market something Microsoft has long-term expectations for even? Does this accelerate the death of physical media? I think probably no, right? I think, we had another comment from BTM Maverick over on YouTube who brought up the fact that Xbox has stated numerous times that they're coming out with a new console, and it's been reported that and this was a report from Jez Corden that the new console was greenlit. I saw a report earlier that like the next Call of Duty is being developed on the next Xbox. So like it seems like the next Xbox is maybe still going to come out if it's already been developed, and they feel
is that like a PSVR 2 thing where it's like we're so far along it would cost just as much to axe this now as if we released it and made a little bit of cash?
I think yes. I do. I think that if they did commit to the idea of a new Xbox, it was probably before they saw a 45% decrease in sales year over year, right? Like it's...
Or maybe they think they've got something special, because there was that rumor that they're going with ARM. They've got like this special source with the cloud.
There's also the conversation about like the handheld device. Like maybe they're going to go for something that is like a hybrid console, and they're going to try to move away. Like they'll try to differentiate themselves more from PlayStation and try to be like, your Xbox games go with you anywhere, everywhere as an Xbox. But if you buy this specific, and again, maybe it's a handheld device that does then plug into
I think it needs to be a handheld. I mean, that's the reason the Switch was so successful, coming off the back of the Wii U, which sold 13 million units. It's like, man, if they can pull that out, which I think they could, especially if they're moving to ARM. Yeah, it could be exciting, because that's the problem right now, is that ostensibly we've got two of the same boxes. They've got pretty much the exact same hardware. They can run exactly the same games to the exact same extent.
Just one of them has more games.
Yeah, it's just one of them's got more games. And maybe if you bought into Xbox back in the Xbox One generation, you feel a little bit hurt, and maybe you are a bit upset and you don't want to move to PlayStation. But man, for me, the writing's on the wall, and I love Xbox. That is my primary console. That's where I usually buy games and where I usually play games if I'm not playing them on Steam Deck or on the Switch. But even I'm like, what is the point in me keeping this box at this point? It is like, I might as well move over to PlayStation.
it definitely gives me pause. I think, like I was happy to buy third-party games on Xbox and like build out my Xbox library. And now it is kind of like, well, what does that look like in the future? And, I think that does make sense. So I guess to put a point on the like hardware feature stuff before we start getting into like overall revenue and which I think is going to be illuminating in terms of like what we're talking about, like what the strategy is moving forward. Do we see another box? Any of those kinds of questions. I think that the answer pretty much has to be no, that they don't have long-term expectations, because I think the amount that they've invested in Game Pass, they've said as much, right? Like they've said as much that like they lost the console race to PlayStation during the generation where people started building digital libraries. They don't think that they're going to reclaim that ground. I got another comment I'll pull in here that is in support of this one. This one comes from Andy Rads, who said, Phil Spencer has been giving interviews again this week. When asked about, quote, becoming Sega and effectively going third party, Phil reassured fans that, quote, investing in our own platform is important, but that Microsoft is, quote, not trying to move them all over to Xbox anymore.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Like investing in our own platform. He is constantly looked at and spoken of as a platform. Now it's not a box, which is weird considering their name is Xbox.
Xbox, yeah.
But it is seen as a platform. It's like where you're logging into Xbox on your PC, you're logging into Xbox on your Steam Deck, and you're playing these games anywhere. And those games are on the cloud or they're wherever, and you can download them and you can play them. And with, Play Anywhere, you can buy it once and play it on Xbox or PC and blah, blah, blah.
And that's the thing, right? Is like he says, I'm going to skip around a little bit. He talks a little bit about like why people might prefer the other console or whatever. And he says, and I don't want to then look and say, well, there's no way we should be able to do a business there, find fans or of our franchises there. I'm not trying to move them all over to Xbox anymore. People were also invested in where our games are. Let's just allow more people to play. And yeah, I mean, like that's great for the software side of things, but like, I mean, I don't think that you can argue that attitude and like him saying those things I've seen people who are like long-term Xbox fans that feel burned, that are mad that the games are multi-platform, that like, if you are one of the console warrior type people, it's like, yeah, you probably do feel a little bit burned. And I
can understand that feeling, and it's an emotional feeling and it's a reactive feeling, but I mean, logically, it makes no sense. It made no sense not to release Call of Duty on PlayStation, and it's making even less and less sense to not release every single game on PlayStation at this point.
Yeah, and he went on to say that like the money that has been made releasing games on other platform is, quote, helpful to us to being able to make to build great portfolios. And then that's like one of the big justifications is like, yeah, well, like we're making money on these platforms that'll allow us to fund other games. Like they talked about like bringing those like smaller indie titles that need to find bigger audiences and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, like they're third party at this point, right? And if they're third party, what is the reason that you would pick up an Xbox over a PlayStation? And increasingly, there doesn't seem to be an answer to that question. And I think, to take it back to some of the comments. I
think the only reason is Game Pass at this point.
Yeah, but why?
If you see Game Pass as a good proposition.
Yeah, but you could play it on PC.
But some people don't want to build a PC.
Some games aren't there too.
Desk. They're not there. PC Game Pass is an inferior product. So, like, I do think there is especially a Series S, right? Like, if it's a second console and you just shove that thing in and you're just like, well, I'm only going to play one game at a time. I might as well just have this as my second console. I mean, that's what a lot of people did with the Xbox One. Mm-hmm. It was like PlayStation 4 was well ahead, and then Game Pass comes around and they're like, oh, well, this looks like a really great deal. I might as well buy a bundle and get Game Pass for a year.
Yeah, definitely. So I think... I think now's probably a good time to get into the revenue stuff, and we can talk about the hard numbers here and how what we're seeing might influence whether or not we see some of these plans actually come to fruition. Because I think the other interesting question, this is something that you've suggested, is like, does Xbox maybe go third party in hardware as well, and like allow a partner to develop physical hardware that runs Xbox games or whatever.
I mean, it's the same thing that the Valve is doing right now. It's like, yeah, they've got the Steam Deck, and that's going to be the flagship pillar product that you run Steam OS on. But you can also now go get a machine from Lenovo that runs it.
I don't think that makes sense, though, because it's like...
I mean, how well does it work for them in Windows?
Right.
That's their bread and butter. That's their business. That's what they know. And if they can just repeat that success that they had in Windows since the 80s with Xbox, well, it kind of makes sense for them to do that. And they've got the partnerships.
But like, that's
there.
the thing is, like, it kind of makes sense. But again, it's like, why, if you're sitting here and this, I'm directing this at you, we both said this, that it's like, well, why would you buy an Xbox? Why would you buy an Xbox that's not even made by Xbox? Like, why would that be better?
It's because it might have a differentiator and it plays some games better, more performant. It looks different. One's a handheld, one's a box that plugs into the TV, one's a hybrid console, one that's like a laptop. You know, there's so many different things and form factors and ways that people can make these consoles.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It would have
because why would you buy any other laptop other than a Microsoft Surface? Price. You like the way another one feels and looks, and the keyboard feels, and
yeah, but then it's not a console anymore, right? Because then it's like,
no, it's not. But my point is that Microsoft makes hardware for Windows, but they also let other people make hardware for Windows. And
I hear you. I think it's just the question of like, if we're sitting here being like, they couldn't even sell 4 million Xboxes this year, why is a third party making them and the only profit margin is selling the box? Like, I just, it's like,
it's not selling the box. It's the marketplace, I guess, for them. Oh yeah,
Xbox
I see what you mean.
Money.
I see what you mean.
Xbox makes the marketplace money, not the hardware.
Well, I mean, but that's the exact.
It's like the Ioneo thing that we talk about, where it's like, so what, you have to pull one out every year? How does that make sense? How does that lead to?
Unless they go with like an Xbox mode, because they sort of have that in Windows already, and it like you can boot into one or the other, and you're basically getting a Windows machine that it has Xbox on it.
That I think is more interesting, is if you go that route where it's like you can just turn any PC into an Xbox, or like the whole, this is an Xbox. Like,
I mean, that would be huge. Like, I would have the, like, Max has his living room PC, right? Mm-hmm. It's competition against Steam at that point, where you boot into an Xbox mode.
Yeah.
However, most PC people have all of their library in Steam.
Yeah, and it's just like, is that any better? It's like, because then it's like, so we're half competing with PlayStation
Steam
for the living room and
there.
losing, and we're half competing with Steam for the PC market, and we're losing. It's like,
well, there was the rumor that they were going to integrate Steam, and maybe they do. Maybe it's just part of the launcher. So like the Steam games that you have are in this Xbox mode, but there's also access to the Xbox
and you can play them through the cloud and everything.
And you play them. Yeah, like there was talk of that. Maybe that's the route they go down. I don't know.
Maybe
it's gonna be very interesting to see what eventually they do decide to do.
Well, let's talk about some of these revenue points, because I am interested to see if what I found here influences your opinion at all. So, and I'm going to be pulling from a couple different financial reports, and I think what I would like to probably do for these episodes is I'll probably try to throw all the sources in the description, since they're so source heavy, and if you want to go read along, you can. But this is pulling from multiple different earnings reports straight from Microsoft. So this is not through anyone else's lens. It's, this is from the horse's mouth. So for the entire 2024 fiscal year, it looks like Xbox Gaming generated $21.50 billion, and they are a subsidy of Microsoft, right? So they don't have a traditional like cash reserve like other companies do. Like, we'll talk about that with PlayStation and Nintendo, of like, this is how much they made in this year, and then this is how much they just have to spend, right? So like, obviously Xbox doesn't have that limitation. That's why they were able to pay $69 billion in cash for an acquisition, is that like they have a parent company with very deep pockets, right? That's like less than what they made last year.
Probably pockets that are too deep, and if I was running a organization, I would probably split them up, but that's not going to happen now.
We'll talk about that, because like that could still happen. That's something that they.
No.
I mean, it could.
Not with the current people in office, I'm afraid.
Well, If Xbox wants to spin it off, I'm not saying like
If Xbox
I'm not
wants to
saying the
spin it off,
government
but it's
breaking it up.
not, yeah,
No,
which was talk like the government was going to break Google up. That's not going to happen anymore. There was talk that the government was going to break Microsoft up. That ain't going to happen
Also,
anymore.
I said it then wasn't going to fucking happen under. They didn't do shit. They talk. Oh, maybe we'll do it. Yeah, okay, but you won't.
They didn't have time, to be fair.
So like we said, 21.5 billion, 21.5 billion is what we are able to pull out. But it's like, it's also like you pointed this out where like the revenue for Xbox is included as part of a SKU that includes other things. So it's like, it's tough to get really hard numbers on what the actual amount is. But this is what I've been able to pull out just based on all the sources that I looked at and trying to contextualize the different numbers that we have, right?
So for like hardware, they bundle it in with all of the Surface products, so you have no idea if it's going to be related to that, and also their mice and keyboards and any hardware they make. And then for services, it's bundled in with like Microsoft 365, and obviously that's selling fucking shitloads of copies. So you have no idea how much they're actually making based on their financial reports.
Unless you really dig, because there are like sentences where they do specifically call numbers out and they don't give you all of the picture, but they give you half of the picture and they give you another half of the picture, and you can start kind of creating a mosaic to like get answers, and that's what we had to do. So gaming revenue increased $6 billion or 39%, and that was driven by growth in Xbox content and services. So that would be like Game Pass and you know, like any of the like service-based stuff, that kind of thing. Xbox content and services revenue increased 50%, driven by 44 points of net impact from the Activision Blizzard acquisition. So that means that all of the other studios that they have, only that growth for every other studio was represented 6%.
I'm surprised it was that high, to be honest. I can't really remember anything that most of the other studios put out in 2024.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I guess Hellblade. Sure. Other than that, what was there? Yeah, exactly. It's like fucking like the dust weeds going across.
I think we're forgetting like one other game, but it's not a ton of games. But to your point, right? Like it speaks volumes about the fact that like the numbers that are being touted that are positive are almost all totally connected to them spending $69 billion in cash to acquire Call of Duty, right? And
I mean, it worked well for them, and you know, it makes their numbers look great.
Yeah, for this year. The question is, does that maintain next year, right? Like, is the next Call of Duty out in 12 months and breaks all those records? And if not, then what does that look like next year, right?
Next year, they won't talk about it. They'll just talk about Microsoft Copilot and how everyone is in the world is using that, and they've made 600
You can report
bazillion.
about how Pete walked out into the ocean. So a couple other bits that I'll offer here is they said operating income increased $2.9 billion or 17%. They didn't say what that increased to, which is a pretty important number, because operating income is, of course, what of the profit made actually goes into the company's coffer rather than that goes into the running of the business, right? So like, if you generated $5 billion in revenue and it costs $3 billion to run your organization, you made $2 billion in operating income. So there was an increase in operating income, but we don't know what that actually looks like. So it's like we have that number of like 2150, but it's like it could cost them $15 billion to run the 50 studios that they now own, right? Because when they acquired Activision Blizzard, they picked up, I think, 30 studios, I believe, and they already owned somewhere in the 20s, the high 20s.
Yeah, and also the 17% could just be oh, we now run World of Warcraft and we have Call of Duty, and the 17% increase comes from that. And also Candy Crush, because they
Right.
have 200 million active users.
Right. So they also said that, let me see. Here we go. Operating expenses, right? So that's like, again, what it costs to run the studio. They increased by $3.9 billion or 31%, driven by gaming, with 34 points of growth from the Activision Blizzard acquisition. So what that means is that, again, right, like gross income increased 2.9 billion, but they're spending almost not 2 times, I guess, because it's closer to 3. They're spending $4 billion a year more to run all these studios. And again, you got to think in the years where these studios don't put out a big game like Black Ops, that accounts for a 44% or whatever it was increase.
Aren't most of those studios working on Call of Duty? Wasn't that like Bobby's grand master plan?
Right,
We have
but
30 studios making Call of Duty.
Yeah, but I mean, there's been conversation about them slowing that roll a little bit, right? And like,
yeah, I mean, Toys for Bob doesn't exist under the Microsoft arm.
Right.
They're a separate independent company now.
So, again, I'm not counting out the fact that there's going to be another Call of Duty soon and it's going to make a lot of money, but you can't guarantee that everyone is going to break the same records that Black Ops did, right? There have been a few Call of Duties in the last however many, I forget exactly the number, where there was declines, right? And like, there's been conversation about how there might not be a Warzone 3 because Warzone 2 is not making as much money. So it's like,
Why did they make a Warzone 2? Seriously, what is with these companies and they just can't go, oh, what's Fortnite doing? Oh, let's just keep making the same game. That's the strategy.
Yep.
Destiny should have done it. And that was an Activision,
That's an Activision
problem
thing
as well. So, like, seriously, just make the same game. Just keep making it.
So, that's part of my argument here is that, like, when you're looking at these, like, well, okay, you know what? Let's keep going because I want to get into the numbers from the other guys as well, and then I can make my little case here. So then there's a few other pieces of data that I want to pull. This is their latest earning report from January, and it paints a less than ideal picture. They said in gaming, revenue decreased 7% and 8% in constant currency as content and services growth continued to be offset by hardware declines. I want to repeat that. Content and services growth are offset by hardware declines. So, and this, like, pulling back to the comments we got from BTM, right? Like, talking about, like, they've already greenlit another console. It's already going to happen. And, like, they don't care about a box. It's all about services. It's like, yeah, but the piss poor performance of the box is impacting the success of Game Pass. I can't imagine they're going to want to sign up for another, 10 years of that?
Well, I mean, you can fudge the numbers if they want to and just be like, well, gaming services revenue, because they could be like, oh, focus is now going to be on services and that's where we're really going. And they can just, write off the hardware stuff as R&D if they want to. Not green. We greenlit it. We decided not to.
Yeah,
decided
right.
Not to go ahead with it.
And that's my point is, like, I think there's a very real chance that if that box exists, that maybe it doesn't come out.
Yeah, I mean, look at right. All you got to do is, things can be greenlit and ideas can happen. Look at where's the Brooklyn console, the revised Xbox Series X that was leaked by the FTC filings and was due out last year alongside a new controller. It didn't happen. It didn't exist. Plans change.
And it could be motivated by this, that they didn't think there was a market for it.
Well, there isn't. So that's
right.
pretty evident.
So they also said, this is from that same pull quote, Xbox content and services revenue increased 2% ahead of expectations, driven by stronger than expected performance in Blizzard and Activision content, including Call of Duty. And again, this speaks to the fact that, like, Black Ops was abnormally successful. Like, you cannot have, like, your entire future be pinned on the fact that every game needs to exceed the last game's success. That bubble will burst eventually. And I think that when you add in the context of, like, spending on games being down and, like, people maybe having less money to spend on something like a subscription service that costs them $20 a month when they could buy one game for the console that they already own and play it for the same amount of time and spend less money, I think that that's a reasonable risk. So now this is talking about their projections for moving forward. We expect in gaming, we expect revenue growth to be in the low single digits, which is not good growth. We expect Xbox content and services revenue growth to be in the low to mid single digits. Again, not very good. Driven by first-party content as well as Xbox Game Pass, hardware revenue will decline year over year. So again, they're expecting to lose money on hardware.
Well, it's not that they're expecting to lose money. They're expecting fewer and fewer people to buy the console, which makes sense because as the generation continues, you expect that fewer and fewer people to be interested in buying the console. We saw that even with the success that Nintendo's had, fewer and fewer people are buying Nintendo Switch, which makes sense because a new one's due out. And I think if a new Xbox is due out in 2028, and people know that, but also, it's got to be that decline has got to be accelerated by the fact that you can just buy their games elsewhere now. There's no real need, and if I feel like all of this shifted when Starfield came out and didn't perform as well as they wanted. They hedged their bets on it. They had a lot riding on it. And I think if that had blown up and people started buying Xbox consoles, we wouldn't have seen them go the third-party route.
Yeah, I think they would have doubled down. But it
didn't work.
Yeah, and I mean, you could argue that maybe that's because the game wasn't, a 10 out of 10.
100%. If it was Elder Scrolls 6, if it was Skyrim 2.
It was a second coming, kind of game where it's like, holy shit. Yeah, like this is like the biggest game of the next 5 years in the same way that Skyrim was. It's like, but it wasn't. So, and then that speaks to the other problem that they have, right? Is like they own 50 studios and they have not shown that they are particularly good at managing them.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, they restructured the management. They had that issue with Redfall, and they were, it was nice to see Phil Spencer have a bit of humility and hold his hands up and be like, "That I was two hands off." Yeah, and I think he went about it the right way.
It's just a matter of what happens next, because it's like we talked earlier about like, the strategy of them being a Sega and them becoming the biggest publisher. It's like you got to be able to run the studio as well. Right? Like, because really what they've done mostly is acquire a bunch of studios, release we'll say fewer than 10 games that were like Game of the Year contenders, and they laid a bunch of people off. That's what they've done.
They've not released a single Game of the Year contender. They've not had any of them come up as a nominee.
I'm literally I'm painting with a very generous brush.
That is very
not
generous,
even talking about, right. So again, like, if we want to be real about it, 0 Game of the Year contenders then, right?
Yeah, it's 0. It is 0. So
no game that has had the impact that games from PlayStation and Nintendo have.
Yeah.
And
which is sad. And I think Indiana Jones would have been there, but it released too late.
Yeah. And it might get some attention next year, but we'll see.
No way, everyone forgets about it.
Depends on what comes out this year.
It's like Smash Brothers all over again.
I got attention. So for PlayStation, for the 9 months that ended in December 31st, 2024, PlayStation made $66.9 billion American, up 8.2% year on year, but took home, and their like operating income that they actually took home was $7.8 billion, which is up 22.9% on hardware. So overall, right, they made about 3 times what Xbox made in that time period with that $66 billion. Obviously, a lot of that is going to operating costs because they also own a shitload of studios and they spent some money and, all that stuff. But it's like PlayStation's business overall generates more revenue than Xbox's. And I think that a not insignificant part of that is that the games and network services number that they have. So that number, right, is just for PlayStation. Then the games and network services, so that's like software sales and PS Plus and all that stuff, sold $23.4 billion, up 13.8%, and the operating income there was $2.1 billion. So altogether, that comes in at like...
Wow, they don't make much from that, do they?
From services?
Yeah, like the profit on it is 1/10.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been higher.
Yeah, you would think. So yeah, I mean, you're looking at like about 10 billion, right? Like after accounting for operating costs.
Yeah, I guess that's what happens when Microsoft owns the data centers and the servers. With them,
like they're paying them.
Run it.
They're paying them for that. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Which again, like speaks to speaks to the value of Microsoft being in that side of the business, right? Like even if Xbox isn't successful, like they're entrenched in video games in a way that like, really nobody can compete with. So few people have the infrastructure to do what they do.
The only other two would be Amazon and Google. And Google already has the software there. They have Stadia. And Amazon owns Amazon Web Services. Amazon is essentially Amazon Web Services with a shop on the front at this point. Like right. Amazon Web Services makes them all the money. So like they could easily do it. They could easily do it if they wanted to.
They probably won't though, right? I mean, they both entered the video game industry and then left it. So
well, Amazon still owns Twitch for some reason.
We'll see how long that lasts. They seem increasingly frustrated that they've not figured out how to monetize it, and they don't have the same like Google mentality of like, well, but if we can scrape so much data from it, who cares, right? Like it's.
Yeah. Do you think Jeff Bezos just really liked watching Ninja or something, and he was like, you know what, I want to buy this?
I bet you his like kid or something, or his like he had some child, and he's like, I want to impress them.
100%. That's what it is. 100%.
I want to be cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Nintendo then, right? Nintendo's revenue in U.S. dollars was $11.17 billion, and they have nearly $14 billion in cash, with many sources claiming that they hold no debt currently. So obviously they made the least of the three, but I think that speaks to what we've been talking about, for the last like year and a half with Nintendo, right? Where it's like, this seems, like the market waiting for the Nintendo Switch 2, right? Like there weren't the same big software releases this year. The previous year there was Tears of the Kingdom and a new 2D Mario with Wonder. So the fact that like they decreased by 35% year over year when you don't have the same caliber of software coming out and people are waiting for a new piece of hardware, yeah, it makes sense. Like it makes sense for where they are in their the life cycle of the device for it to be, in a downturn, right? And it looks like their operating income, I believe, was $3.5 billion for the most recent quarter.
Yeah, which was surprising to me because it's $500 million more than Microsoft's. That's it. You'd have thought it was more. But yeah, because they're like selling 9 million consoles in a quarter.
But again, right? It's like we're at the tail end of a console that has had unprecedented longevity, right? So it's like in context, like they made the least, but like they won't be making the least next year, right? Or the end of this year.
Wow, hopefully, yeah.
Assuming that the launch goes well, which I think it will, but remains to be seen, obviously.
Never know. They might make it $799, and you need a second job in order to afford it.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, that worked out long term for PlayStation. that strategy netted out over the course of 10 years and a global recession. So we'll see. Wow. So all of this to say, right? I guess this is the question I've been driving to that I now want to throw to you, Steve. So the last thing I'm going to bring in is an article here from gamesindustry.biz that points out that U.S. game spending fell 15% in January 2025. So we are, and this also extended to content spend, which dropped 12% compared to the same time last year. And the only area where you did see some growth was in non-mobile subscription spending, which grew by 13%, in addition to a 2% rise in mobile spending. So there's also the hardware side of it, which is hardware sales have decreased 45% year over year, which is the lowest total since January 2020, which would have been probably around the time that there was a peak drought of consoles, right? So, there were a decline across all platforms. PlayStation 5s fell by 38%, Xbox by 50%, and Switch by 53%. So I think
It's about even in terms of the decline then across the board.
Yeah, with PlayStation, obviously, like, netting out on the higher end of that, 38 is quite a bit less than 50 when you're talking about like percentage points, But again, right, it was
They
an
also
overall,
did just put out a new box, so
which
people are going to run that.
And I think that does speak to the fact that the PS5 Pro not selling as well as they would like, right? So like, yeah, fair enough, right? Like, I think to me though, this speaks to what I've been talking about, which is that people have less money to spend on games, and the idea that people are going to.
I kind of feel it's people are spending less on entertainment across the board, and they're being more choosy.
No, totally.
Because like you look at the subscriptions, there's everyone other than Netflix has basically faced a decline, and people swap and choose. It's like, well, I'm going to have Netflix, but then I'm going to add Max or Disney or Amazon or one of the others to it. And it kind of feels like that might be the case for video games as well.
I think like, Game Pass has the Netflix quality in that regard, where if you're going to have one, it's definitely going to be Game Pass. So like, there's certainly that advantage. But I mean, that's, I guess, my question, right? Is like, we saw this big increase, right, with Call of Duty this year. Inflation's up. It's getting worse in the US right now, right? With tariffs and everything.
Tariffs, yeah.
Right. And granted, that will affect console sales as well, right? Because that might mean that your Nintendo Switch 2 or your PlayStation 6 or whatever, right? Like, or even your PlayStation 5 are a lot more expensive. And that will continue to choke consoles in a bad way, and that would be of a benefit to Game Pass. But I think the question becomes, right, like, of the folks that are Game Pass subscribers, right? Like, how many of the games that they're playing are those longer titles that you don't actually save money by playing them, right? Like, if you are going to play, I don't know, like something like Avowed, right? That is like a 40 plus hour game or something like that, right? I don't know exactly how long it is. Unless you're playing it pretty religiously, right? Like, you'll save money by buying the game and just playing it on the box you already own, right? And I don't think we've hit that tipping point with people who are like Game Pass subscribers that don't own a device, right? Like like we saw a big, huge portion of that increase was on PC. So it's like,
there's not an easy way to do it on mobile yet, though. I feel like there needs to be a push and a drive and a way to do it. And I kind of feel like mobile is where it's going to happen. If it's going to happen anyway,
that would be huge for them if they can pull that off. And it is like reliable, and you can like use the cloud streaming stuff to like just play games right on your mobile device, or like, or to your point, on your TV. Yeah, I mean, that'll, that once that's locked in, their ability to expand their market becomes exponential, and like that.
Yeah, and you just advertise to all your Candy Crush customers, and lump that in with Game Pass. Like, you get some extra gems as part of your Game Pass experience on Candy Crush.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know the currency in Candy Crush. It's probably sweets. It's
gems,
probably
maybe some kind of But that, I guess that's the question, right? Is like, has Game Pass achieved enough of a mass market penetration and become like an indispensable way that these?
I don't think so, and I kind of feel like we've seen that by Ubisoft wanting to go and make Ubisoft Plus, and EA's got its own thing with EA Play, and it's the same thing that we saw with Netflix, where it's like, oh well, we're Disney, why don't we make our own service? And Paramount's got his own service now, and that's where it's going to go, and it's going to be driven to. However, they do have Call of Duty, they do have they do have Elder Scrolls, they do now have Diablo and World of Warcraft, and all of these things that they can kind of roll in to Game Pass. Imagine if you got Game Pass as part of or you got World of Warcraft as part of your Game Pass subscription, and you kind of do the two. They sort of do something similar to that with Elder Scrolls Online, whereas if you have Game Pass, you get some additional bits and pieces. And they had that thing with Riot where you get some extra bits.
You unlock all the League of Legends characters.
Yeah, the League of Legends stuff. Yeah, so it's like, I could see them doing more there to kind of drive growth. The question as to whether they go with another box or not for the next generation, I think, is to whether they think the market's there for it, and whether they can negotiate with PlayStation to get their brand on PlayStation. If they can do what Ubisoft has done and EA's done with EA Play and Ubisoft Plus on PlayStation and get an Xbox logo there and you subscribe to it and you get all the Xbox games included.
Yeah, like a Game Pass Lite that's like just the Xbox, the Microsoft published titles. I think that is the way. If there's a version of that moves forward, that's what it would be.
So if they manage that, then I kind of feel like they might go, what's the point in us having our own box? We can just be like, well, unless the differentiation is hardware and PlayStation doesn't go down the handheld route, which I don't think they will, that could be the only other boon for them. And I think they've got to do a handheld. I think it has to be a handheld if they're going to do another console or a hybrid thing. Like there needs to, that's where the market is. We've seen that. You can see that with the Switch. That's why I think that's a large part of why the Switch is so successful. Obviously their software plays into that, but I do think it's the handheld to take it on the go, play it anywhere. You know, how households have 2 or 3 of them in the same way they did with Game Boys and DSs.
Yeah, and I guess that's like the interesting thing is like when you start like looking at all these things, it's like, is this decline enough to scare them out of the console space, right? And if not, what can they do to make their next box more attractive so they're not repeating the same failure? Because I just can't imagine that they're satisfied with that. No matter how much Phil says, like, it's not our goal to bring people over to the box anymore. That's fine, but like when you're losing money on it, right? Like when
that probably is like the goal, not to bring them over to the box. The thing is, though,
right? But then why would you develop another box? Is the question. If that's not the goal, then why do it again? Why spend money on R&D? Why release it? Especially when retailers don't want to carry your device, they don't want to sell your games anymore because people aren't buying them. It's just like.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's got to differentiate somehow. Is it going to be on price? Like, can they do a box that's a lot cheaper because they're?
Or maybe they're like, hey, we're not doing physical anymore, and you can only buy it through Xbox Direct, and we don't need to go to we don't need any of those partners anymore. Those are all options for sure. And if they change those metrics of success, then maybe that makes it make sense. That's possible.
I'd be surprised if there's physical software on the next generation from Xbox and PlayStation. PlayStation's shown that the digital edition has been so successful for them. That's the norm now. You buy that console and you tack on a drive if you want to. I don't see them adding in physical software for the Xbox next time around. It makes no sense, especially if all the stores are dropping it anyway. Why would you bother? Why would you invest in that when you can just be like, well, you're going to subscribe to Game Pass anyway to play our games, so you might as well do that. I think the differentiator has got to be on how it works. If it's price, can they get the price down to a point where it's like, you know, $200, $300 competitive because they've got some secret sauce. They're switching to ARM. They've got some machine learning. They're utilizing the cloud. They're doing something different that PlayStation can't do. I could see that being a way that they drag people over and bring people over. It's like, well, you can play the same games, but the console's costing you half the price. So why don't you come over and do that? That's kind of if they get out ahead of the PS6 in the same way they did in the Xbox 360 generation, I think that could help them. You know, they came out a whole year earlier and that really gave them some headway, and they compete on price in that generation. So it's like they had a double whammy. And the hardware was easier to work with for developers. Developers love working with the 360 versus the PlayStation 3. Right. There's lots of ways I think they could make a console viable. Is whether they want to put the effort and the time and the money into it. It seems like they've already done a lot of that hard work, and they've probably already made a selection for what the next generation looks like. So I kind of feel like that one does go ahead, but I feel like that's the make or break for them. It's if this console doesn't work, that's it. We're done on the console space, and we do become a Sega, or we do spin Xbox out into a separate business.
Maybe. I think I could see either of those happening, depending on how things go. Because like there was conversation about Xbox being spun out into its own business during the struggles during the Xbox One generation, right? And
but I mean, it's not viable as a business, clearly on its own. You know,
it's not, and that's literally my entire point, man. That's the entire thing I'm driving to with this, right? Is like talk about how PlayStation and Nintendo make less money, all you want. Talk about how we're gonna move past boxes, all those things. The meat and potatoes of this, in my opinion, you don't have to agree, is that PlayStation and Nintendo make less money, but they're sustainable, right? These are
yes. However,
brands.
Sony ain't sustainable without PlayStation. Did you see how much that propped up their business? Yeah. It was insane.
You're right. Absolutely. But it's the inverse of the Xbox problem, which is that Microsoft props up Xbox. Xbox is not a viable business. PlayStation is. right? People don't buy Xboxes, they buy PlayStations and they buy Nintendos. And I'm not saying that that means that Xbox's strategy isn't viable. The question is, again, are they here too soon? Right? Is this a repeat of the DRM always on type situation where it's like that's an idea that was, crazy and laughed out of the room and now it's standard. And they were ahead of the wave on that, right? But they, it was the wrong time. And I think that there's an argument to be made that like maybe that's what we're looking at here, and not necessarily that like it's going to go belly up or something like that in the next couple of years. But my question is, how long does parent company Microsoft continue to write checks for these large sums of money to facilitate and prop up a business that has never really been worth its salt except for during the 360 generation, right? Every other generation, they've been the loser. And
yeah, but they've still made money. They have still made money, and the amount of IP they own now. They were the world's biggest publisher in December. I think they could easily.
But again, they were the world's biggest publisher, and that accounted for less than $1 billion in revenue. Do you think Xbox is happy with that when they spent $69 billion?
A single month, though. Keep that for 69 months. You've made your money back, and then after that you're.
But again, it also costs $4 billion to run these studios. So it's like, it's not that. It's not you need to make $1 billion every month. You need to make $5 billion. Well, not every month, but
no, that's a year, I presume. $5 billion a year.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So I mean,
there's a lot.
$5 billion divided by 12. Then it's
it's a $500,000 a month.
And so that's the point, right? Is Xbox okay with spending upwards of $80 billion over the last 10 years to be the number one video game publisher?
Do you know?
I don't know that they are.
Why,
is Microsoft okay with that? Xbox might be, but
yeah, part of the reason why I think they kind of are in terms of generating researching and developing a new console. That becomes their cloud solution. That's the system that they're subbing out to PlayStation to run their games on and stream to you. So it's a double whammy. We're selling this product to the consumer. Xbox is still in people's minds. And also, we can put this into server racks in our Azure data centers, and we charge this out on the hour for PlayStation to run their games on. So we're making money from the competitors here, there, and everywhere. And that I kind of see.
And maybe that's how you justify it. Right, is like the money you make on services offsets that, the loss you take on the console. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, like, we had a line item where they talked about how the failures of hardware are offsetting the successes of Game Pass. I don't know how long you can do that.
Well, it was the successes of content and services in general. It wasn't even just Game Pass. It was like
that's true.
All content, like video game sales across Xbox and PC, as well as movie sales and whatever else. Do people even buy movies on the Xbox store anymore? I doubt that.
No, you can. So yeah, I think that's the thing of it for me is like it's not me like criticizing the thought process. It's like, are we there yet? Because like if we're about to go through a recession where people don't have money to spend,
there yet now, but are we there yet in 3 years when PlayStation 6 is coming out? And that's really what they've got to look at.
Right, but again, it's like if we're about to go through 3 years of a recession and it's going to be like it was at the end of the Xbox 360 PS3 generation where people don't have money to spend and they have less money to go around. Like I don't know that Game Pass can just like. Okay. I made the point earlier about how I see a path where they struggle to maintain interest because there's not a Call of Duty Black Ops 6 coming out or whatever. And the reality of like, I'm feeling the squeeze. Like eggs cost 4 times as much as they do right now. Maybe I'll turn off my Game Pass subscription.
We need to do an after dark about the egg thing. It reminds me so much of like, we had a shortage a few years back of eggs, and it's just bizarre to me that you guys are going through the same thing.
Cycles.
We had it when we left the European Union.
Yep. And that's the thing of it, right? Like I like Game Pass. Like I'm a Game Pass subscriber right now. But yeah, I mean it costs more than any other subscription service that I use, and I don't use it as much as those
No,
just because, right? Like,
it's the one I cancel first.
I cancel it often. I turn it on and off because
there's only one I never cancel. Only one. And it's YouTube. That never goes. Can't live without my YouTube Premium.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Those ads are so annoying.
They are really annoying. 100%.
I turned it back off, and I'm like, every day I'm like, I gotta
can't do it. Can't do it. That's gotta stay. Yeah. I turned off Spotify and I moved to YouTube Music, and I was like, you know what? I can justify the slightly shittier experience of YouTube Music because I can live without adverts then.
Yeah.
And that's the route I think everyone should go.
I'm thinking about getting on Tidal. That's gonna be my big
Tidal. Yeah. Okay.
Better quality, better exchange rate for the artist. It's just better. So I want to close things off with a question we got from Left over on the Discord. That's just about like the Xbox as a publisher future, and I think we can wrap there for the day. While we see Xbox licensing out their games to other platforms, do you think we'll see them license out IP to outside studios? I know they've acquired a ton of in-house studios, but there's a lot of IP owned by Xbox that just sits around gathering dust. Is that a next step for Microsoft?
It's already happening, Left. Toys for Bob.
Toys for Bob. Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Left. I think that will definitely happen. I think that they will, again, like if being a publisher, right, is an increasingly large part of their future, yeah, it's gonna have to be, because that's what they own that actually has value. Is they own a ton of IP and they own a ton of talent, but it costs a lot of money to maintain studios. It costs very little to let an established studio use your IP.
Yes.
So there you go.
And I think there needs to be a good reason for some of these IPs to come back, though. What you don't want is, a Philips CDI situation where you let someone do it and it's terrible, and you release it and it's crap.
No, I think you want exactly a Toys for Bob situation. You have a studio that's built to make a certain type of game, and you have an IP that matches that, and you let them do it.
Yeah, it's the same as like Mercury Steam, right? Building out Metroid Dread.
Yeah,
they proved that they were capable of making those type of games, and Nintendo went to them and was like, okay, build us one, make us one.
Exactly. So I think yes, I think that is probably in their future. I think.
Do you think that's the future for them across the board? It may be cheaper than running these studios.
That's my fear. That's what I've been saying since I talked about why I don't like consolidation, right? Phil said, we're not going to lay people off. They laid people off, right?
Well, they kind of had to. A lot of that was like, does it make sense to have two QA departments, two release departments, there's a lot of duplicate roles across those. Two social media teams. Do you really need that?
Yeah. And like, for some of those things, sure. But like, we've seen other roles get downsized in some of these studios
100%.
already. It has happened. So yeah, I mean, that's again, like, part of the whole argument for me is like, Microsoft parent company is only going to be okay with like loss for so long, right? You can only invest in the future so long before you need to see a return. And if we get to that point, it's gonna be like, do we need to spend this much? Like, Double Fine? How much did Psychonauts make? Axe him. Get rid of Tim Schafer. He costs too much. You know what I mean?
Never ever get rid of Tim Schafer.
No, but that's the thing, though. Is like
an institution.
That's the decisions that those types of people make, and they will, and like that will happen if not for Xbox finding success, right? Like, Game Pass needs to stay healthy, and it needs to grow year over year, and it needs to keep proving the doubts that I'm raising here, right? They need to be squashed, and. I think.
See, I used to have a lot of confidence in them, and I had a lot of confidence in Phil Spencer. And
we were
I
very
thought
bullish.
They had a really good strategy, and it's proven not to be the case. And it's sad. I just think they couldn't find they scrambled and they just could not sell the Xbox. I think what they needed to do was a huge price cut, and you make a loss on the console, and you make it back on the subscription.
I mean, I think they also just overextended themselves. Right? I think like launching a new hardware generation at the same time that you're trying to double down on a, untested, unproven model for selling video games, while you're also spending upwards of $80 billion to acquire two major publishers after you already went on a buying spree, buying a bunch of other smaller teams. It's just like they ballooned up so quick, and it's not surprising that they've struggled to, keep things tidy, because like, of course they didn't. They have, acquired like, say every one of those studios has 100 employees, right? It's like, that's thousands and thousands of people that have just become your employees overnight, and you need to manage all these studios, and you have no infrastructure to do that. And again, I'm not saying that they can't figure it out, that it's too late, any of those things. It's just like, when all of your big successes are pinned on an acquisition that you spent $69 billion in cash and took multiple years for you to achieve, okay, so what's the next thing? What's the next big win? I don't see one on the horizon. I don't see what keeps Game Pass subscribers subscribed in 2025, or that lets them have a record.
That's the thing. But I don't know what keeps
setting
me
year the same way that Black Ops did.
Yeah, but I don't know what keeps me switching my PlayStation on this year. I don't know why I'm going to buy a Switch 2. I feel like it is a bit too early. However, we are about to enter into the second quarter.
And the difference with those things, though, right, is like, you already own those. You own a PlayStation and you own a Switch. So even if you don't turn it on this year, when something comes out that you want to play, you will. And like, that's the thing. That's different. Mm-hmm. And they're making more money from you because you're spending more. Again, right? If I subscribe for a whole year of Game Pass, right, I'm spending
it's like $120, $150
now.
It's
longer. Isn't it $20 a month now for Ultimate?
That's for the Ultimate. It depends what you want. If you're going for the Ultimate, then yeah, it's like $200 a year.
Yeah.
I think they give you a bit of a discount.
Which, like, that's a lot of money. Whereas, like, I don't know. It's a lot of money if you're not using it, right? And
it is. It's a lot of money if you're not using it. But if you are, then it kind of works out. I think a lot of people.
I think the value is still very much there if you're someone like us and you play a shitload of video games. But
the problem with us is we play a shitload of video games, but we're playing them on PlayStation and Nintendo and PC, and like then there's the occasional one on Xbox. So I think that even people who are big enthusiasts, unless Xbox is their solo platform, the value is kind of dwindling.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that's just. It's a big, complicated question. And, like, I don't pretend to have the answers. I'm just raising questions and concerns, right? Because I think that...
I don't think anyone's got the answer. I don't think Phil's got the answer. I don't think anyone at Microsoft has got the answer. I feel like they're going to do, because they're so scrambly in last place again, I feel like they're going to do something kind of big and unexpected, and I feel like it is going to be some kind of handheld console or shift to Xbox OS or something like that, some outlandish that maybe grabs them a little bit of market share back.
I think if not for that, then everything we said it's got to be it. Like, if not something like that, I don't see in what universe they decide to keep making hardware and selling physical software and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't make sense, right? Like, that's not where their money's coming from. So why continue to invest in it? And
just go back to being what they started. Microsoft make software games. and make games for PC and for other consoles, and And I think I was saying the exact same thing about Nintendo during the Wii U generation, and look what they did. They managed to turn it around.
Totally.
And Xbox could do the exact same thing. So
I hope they do.
Don't write anyone off.
I hope they do. I want to be clear. We're not rooting against them, right? Like, we're rooting for them. We're pointing this stuff out because, we want to see them succeed. So I think that's a good place to wrap for today. Thank you guys for joining us on the first monthly edition of the FlipScreen Games podcast. Thank you to everybody who wrote in. Thank you for all the comments, all the conversation that was going on the last 2 weeks in the Discord. A lot of that informed the conversation here. Thank you for all the comments and for being part of the conversation. If you guys want to write in and let us know what you think about today's conversation, what do you think is the future of Xbox? Do you see hardware in their future? Do you think we're moving towards a universe where, Game Pass is the future of Xbox? Do they shift to being, just a publisher and a services company? Or do you maybe share some of my concerns that, like, the next couple of years, with there being less money to go around, that might significantly impact Game Pass and the success of those types of access-based platforms? I'm
Watch
very
them
interested
do none of those things and become Konami and go away and not make any games but own all the IP for years to come, and then come back and outsource 3IP to make mediocre games. And there you go.
That's the fear. So we'll see. And of course, we will catch you all for the FlipScreen Games podcast next month. Okay, remember 2 weeks out, we'll have the topic announced. You'll get to write in. If you have a topic that you'd like to suggest, now's the chance to write in with it. Let us know what you want to hear us discuss on next month's show. However you choose to do so, you can find all the ways to get in touch over on our website. That's flipscreen.games. And then, of course, I want to extend a very, very special thank you to... Oh, my God, I blacked myself out there for a second on the screen. Apologies. I want to give a very special thank you to all of our Patreon producers for the month of March. They are, of course, scrolling. This is a very long document. Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sovi, Project Julian, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. Y'all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out those shows, Nintendo Noise and the Steam Deck podcast, head over to flipscreen.games. That's the link. You'll find all the places we are, all the ways you can get involved and show your support. However you choose to do so, thank you for rocking and rolling with us, and we will see you next time.